Have you ever felt trapped in a relationship that drains your soul, leaving you questioning your own sanity? Welcome to Narcissistic Abuse with Vanessa Reiser, the podcast that shines a light on the dark tactics of abusers and empowers survivors to reclaim their lives. I'm Vanessa Reiser, licensed therapist, author, advocate, and fellow warrior on the path to healing from narcissistic and cult abuse. Joining me for many upcoming episodes is my co-host Dave. We'll unpack each conversation together, diving deeper into narcissistic abuse, cult dynamics, politics, pop culture, and what it all means for real life healing. Today, we'll hear harrowing stories from survivors, explore the psychology behind these toxic relationships, and share insights and tools to spot red flags, break free, and begin profound healing. This show is for mature audiences and may include upsetting topics like violence. For full content warnings, sources, and resources, check the episode notes. Guest opinions are their own and don't necessarily reflect mine or any affiliated platforms. This podcast is not a substitute for therapy, legal, or medical advice. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Narcissistic Abuse with Vanessa Reiser. I'm your host, Vanessa. Before we jump in, I want to give a huge shout out to my incredible co-host, Dave. Welcome back, Dave. Thanks for joining me again to unpack this one. Last episode, we had the absolute honor of sitting down with Gretchen Carlson, the trailblazing former Fox News anchor, best-selling author, and co-founder of the nonprofit Lift Our Voices. Gretchen shared her powerful story of enduring workplace harassment, the courage it took to speak out when so many systems were built to keep survivors silent, and how NDAs have often been used as tools to protect abusers rather than victims. She opened up about the personal toll, the legal battles, and the bigger mission behind Lift Our Voices, banning abusive NDAs, empowering survivors to come forward without fear of career destruction, and pushing for real change so no one has to choose between justice and their livelihood. In today's episode, Dave and I are diving deep into that conversation. We're breaking down the moments that hit hardest, reacting to what Gretchen shared about coercive control in professional settings, reading your comments and questions from social media, and talking about why this fight against silencing tactics, systemic protection of abusers, and the misuse of NDAs is more urgent now than ever. Whether you've experienced workplace abuse, narcissistic dynamics at work, or just want to understand how we can all support survivors and demand accountability, this recap is for you. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's get into it. Dave and I are ready to lift our voices together. Here we go. Hey, Dave, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
So, all right. So today we're going to talk about Gretchen Carlson.
Yes, Gretchen.
What did you think of that interview?
I think what shocks me the most about it is how many people who have been through some sort of abuse have their voices silenced. And it's fascinating to me how that happens. I can understand it, not that I agree with it, but I can understand it from a corporate perspective, right? Because like when you're signing onto a company, they want to keep trade secrets and you have to sign NDAs and all of that stuff. But what I guess doesn't really compute and where I start to glitch out is where if you witness something illegal or you go through something like abusive or sexual harassment or whatever, that NDA still applies. And that to me just like it doesn't compute. I don't quite understand it, how that it like just from a moral perspective doesn't seem right. Like,
Yeah, there's
but
this recent article that came out today about a woman who is suing Citi, and there's this coercive control component that's particularly compelling. Um, but they have almost like their own governmental-ish like bodies within these giant organizations where they'll bring you in like under the guise of it being like human resources, and they'll interview you all in an effort to protect themselves, but a lot of that has gone unchecked. So a lot of people in those environments, like what Gretchen is referencing, there's tremendous abuse of power. So to your point, like on paper, yeah, we're going to protect our interests. We're going to protect this proprietary information. Don't give out McDonald's special sauce, this kind of stuff. And then it turns into something that gets totally abused and people end up, falling into these pockets of being vulnerable too. Because what are you going to do? Give up your livelihood? I mean, it's hard.
Yeah, and that's the difficult part too. I mean, she alluded to it where, if somebody has the courage to come forward, and a lot of these companies, even if they use an arbitrator or an independent, they're usually skewed in the company's favor. A lot of people end up losing, and then their reputation gets smeared behind the scenes. But because of the NDA, they're not allowed to talk about their experience. So when they go for another interview at another company, and they're like, "Well, why did you leave your previous company?" And you sit there and you're like, "Well, I'm not allowed to talk about it." Makes you seem kind of shifty or like something bad went down, and then typically HR will just shy away from people like that, right? So it's yeah, it doesn't make sense how the corporate structure is nowadays, especially when it comes to those NDAs. I mean, I've signed them like 100%. I've signed them and I've never even thought twice about them. I definitely think twice about them now after being in this world for a little while. But once again, if you think about it, like when you're going in for a job interview and they say, "Well, here's your onboarding package, sign this NDA," and you're like, "Wait a second, no, I want to redline this. I want my lawyer to look at it." They're going to be like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! Like this guy's going to be a problem. This woman's going to be a problem. Like maybe we should rescind the offer." You know what I mean? So it's kind of like a lose lose almost, and that's the thing that I find really really difficult.
Yeah, and you and I
Yeah.
have talked about this a lot because I know you're particularly interested in this kind of leg of it.
Mhm.
But the reason why it's so challenging and why I don't really talk about it too much is because that power dynamic is so solidified in my mind that you're not really you hardly have a shot, to your point. Like it's not even you're so the chips are stacked so far against you that there's really, I mean, it's just the power is there. They
Yeah.
have the power.
Yeah, and I've seen some shady shit in my day too in the corporate space as well. And obviously, the thought of being a whistleblower, and I mean, okay, when I say shady shit, I'm not talking about illegal activities, but I'm talking a lot of gray area stuff. But like, you can't even think or consider speaking up about it because one, you'll be met with denials, and then your career will be railroaded, and then if you think about going to another company one day, a lot of industries are incestuous. Everyone knows everyone, and so you have to really keep your silence. And it's the amount of stress that places on somebody. I think is the sad part about it, right? Like you're living your life in such an inauthentic way when you know that there's injustice going on, and it takes its toll, like from a physiological perspective as well.
Yeah, and you can get blacklisted. I think
100%.
the thing that's so interesting about Gretchen's case is that she ended up going up against this giant monster, this giant conglomerate, and won. She had a victory. So we're sitting here talking about how no way, you're never going to have any, I don't know how that would look today based on a lot of the variables that are new and recent in terms of Trump and in terms of the media being what it is, seemingly shifting towards or shifting away from the First Amendment and stuff like that. So that feels like it could be different than when she encountered this, but I don't know. It's just she has such an interesting story because she did have a victory.
Yeah, it's really what I take away from it is it's the power dynamics and keeping people in check. You know what I'm saying? Like it's like this incessant need to make sure that none of their secrets get exposed and maintain this squeaky clean image. And it's such a parallel to, individual romantic relationships when you're in a relationship with a narcissist, right? You are conditioned almost to keep their secrets because you feel like you can't expose them, because if you do expose them, then you receive the wrath. And I found it interesting though how Carl or how she was talking about how she's worked with a lot of CEOs, saying that it starts at the top, and they are the ones who can set the tone and set the example and set all this. And I think the biggest challenge with that is the fact, like what you said earlier, is like 25% of CEOs are on the antisocial spectrum. you're trying to convince people to not be who they truly are, and that I think is a huge challenge, because she is right that it starts from the top. But I know from my own personal experience, I have seen leadership establish, or quote unquote corporate establish the corporate, oh, I can't even think of the word now. Like no, when they like the corporate environment, like if they want their what they want their mission statement to be, and they'll say one thing and then they do something completely different,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? And
I
that's tough.
y- yeah, I think also what I found so interesting, because I know you know my story very well, but I did sign civil restraints, and I talked about it on the podcast with Gretchen because it feels so adjacent. In fact, I don't understand quite what the difference is between an NDA and civil restraints, because I like to call it like NDA's little brother. But really, what I signed was so similar because I had no voice as soon as I signed it. So to me, it feels like it's the same fucking thing, which is really weird.
Hmm.
Um, but I signed this thing, and to your point, everybody who sat in front of me and said, sign this thing, and myself included, it made sense. It was like, okay, you don't talk about them, they don't talk about you. You know, everybody sort of skips off into the universe and bygones, and shake hands, see you later. And I signed this fucking thing, and it was the single stupidest thing I've ever done in my life. And I've done some stupid shit. It was like I couldn't believe how that was going to come back to bite me in the ass. I could not believe it was like in perpetuity. If I sneeze on a Wednesday, this fool would bring me back into court, and there was nothing that I could do to get out from under that, because to your point, this idea of being exposed. And according to the law, or according to this document, I would even be disallowed from discussing any of the pains that I was going through in the family court system, etc., with even my own son in my own home. And that's not how, first of all, that's not how people heal. You need to discuss things, not just with your therapist, with your friends. And also this idea of like speaking the truth about what was going on, potentially even protecting the next victim, from what was going on. It's all really important. And like the truth getting squashed feels so tragic and feels so corrupt. But I feel like I can really put my mind around this episode with Gretchen, because I remember feeling like I had no voice, and it was like the worst feeling, really.
I can imagine. And this is the thing where it's really difficult for me to understand as well, is that I can understand the civil restraints where you're talking about like maybe like having handcuffs around talking about your interpretation of events, or like for instance, where if somebody were to say, he yelled at me, and their position is, well, I didn't yell, I raised my voice. Like I can understand like not talking around those things, but when you're talking about data and facts and like evidence, and you're literally told you're not allowed to talk about the things that really happen, like that you have the evidence of it happening, that to me, I mean, I'm not American, but it seems to like clash with the First Amendment, right? Like,
I was just going to say that. It
yeah,
feels like there's a constitutional piece to this that is just bent. It doesn't feel like it fits under the Constitution. Any part of it, actually. NDA, all of the concept of NDA or civil restraints, they seem to butt up against the Constitution. The Constitution would win with
mm,
the First Amendment every time, you would think. And people told me that in this endeavor. They were like, you should just get a constitutional lawyer. You should just get a constitutional lawyer. Talk to a constitutional lawyer, because your First Amendment should trump all of this garbage. And it is compelling. That is compelling. But I'm sure in Gretchen's case, they exhausted the living shit out of that. And she still has no ability to tell her story, as she referenced in the podcast, which is crazy because they made movies about her. And imagine, and this is my point. So I am now without civil restraints. They have been lifted. And I don't talk about him. I don't discuss him. I'm not using my platform to talk about it. It wasn't about that. It was so much more about not being able to, and feeling quieted. It was the forcefulness of that. It was the idea that I didn't have a voice and I was disallowed from doing it. Not that I was going to, but I just, that feeling of not being able to is a very weird feeling. It would be like, and I don't want to be like, like demonstrative about this, but it would feel like if someone put their hand over your mouth. Like it is a weird feeling. It's not to say that you would want to be saying anything in that moment. Maybe you're going to take a nap, but the idea is you can't. And that's a weird thing to feel.
I was gonna say it almost feels like the emotional toll behind it, because it's one thing to choose not to say something, and then it's another thing to be told not to say something, right? It's almost like you're having your civil liberties removed unjustly.
Yeah.
That's how it's coming across. Like that's what I'm hearing from it, and I can only, trying to put myself in your shoes, that's how I think I would feel about it, because it's having your voice taken away without, for an unjust cause, I think is just emotionally draining. I couldn't imagine what that was like. I really can't. I don't
And
know.
I think that's what's so important about the Constitution. I have to imagine that those, like the First Amendment was put into place for this exact reason. Because even like when Charlie Kirk was shot, and I could not stand him, I just thought he was an absolute monster. But it is really interesting because you can't do that, right? You can't just shoot the person who says the thing that you don't agree with. As much as, we could get into like what kind of rhetoric and propaganda and how far that can go and how dangerous it is, it still really highlights why the Constitution and the First Amendment are so important. Because ultimately, like in the case of, who's that asshole who said that the Sandy Hook shooting didn't happen?
Oh, um,
Alex Jones.
Alex Jones.
So
Yeah.
Alex Jones comes out, right, and he runs his mouth about the Sandy Hook murders of these poor innocent babies in this classroom in Connecticut. Didn't occur. It was a hoax. And because he has so many followers, all of these psychopaths that follow him, these QAnon whack jobs, start to now communicate with the parents of these deceased children, telling them, how dare you? You're a fucking crazy person. Nobody killed your daughter. You're sick. I hope you die, or whatever these wackos are doing. And these parents have to endure, which is just unimaginable sorrow and trauma. And then on top of that, it's compounded by this jackass who just spreads this rhetoric, and then all of the minions do their things or whatever. What ends up happening, though, is Alex Jones is brought to justice, and he ends up having to pay or owe millions, maybe billions. I can't even remember if it's a B or an M. But he totally gets exposed for being a complete fraud and a puppeteer, and that's probably what would have happened to Charlie Kirk, like what's probably going to happen to a lot of the people that are behind the protecting of Trump and Netanyahu and all the rest. Ultimately, the truth will come out. It takes forever. I feel like the wheels of justice move far too fucking slow, and I'm exhausted with it all. But I do think that we deserve that moment where we can see the truth about what this is, like we did with Alex Jones and like we did with John Gotti and Hitler and others. Like you can see the ultimately how this sort of plays out. And then what happened with Charlie Kirk is he becomes a martyr, and then that sort of just emboldens everybody else. So it really does bump up against it. I think you have to allow these morons to say their thing, get exposed. It's just exhausting. And it
Yeah.
takes forever.
I don't know U.S. constitutional law, but from what I understand, the First Amendment does have guardrails established. Like you have the right to free speech, but it within certain parameters, right? Like you can't get up on a soapbox with a megaphone and say, "I want you to start killing everybody here." Like there's guardrails around that, and that's where I think it's really difficult. Where a lot of people toe the line, and I'm sure Alex Jones probably thought that he was towing the line between First Amendment and just spewing complete lies. And it wasn't so much, I don't think it was about the lies, but it was more of the impact that his lies had on the people around him, right? Like that's kind of where the I guess the delineation from where the First Amendment would cover you versus prosecute you, I guess you could
You
say,
bring
for all
you
intents
bring
and
up
purposes.
such a good point. You can't just
Yeah.
say lies. Like you can't defame, and you can't just pull some story, about somebody and defame them and create some narrative. To your point, the First Amendment's not going to protect you from that. That's a
Yeah,
really good point.
exactly. Yeah, like free speech is when, and once again, I don't know the law, so don't quote me on it, but I mean, it's hard to hold somebody for liable or for slander if it's all based on facts, right? Like I've I've had somebody in my past to threaten me to take me to court because of something that I had said, and I was like, I looked at them and I was like, okay, let's go, because
Right.
facts speak for themselves, right?
Right.
I don't care that you got your butt hurt because of something that you did and said. Well, like, and then that person backed down because it was empty, idle threats, right? But
Right. Right.
and I think this is where the issue that I think that is so frustrating when you hear Gretchen's story is that, like, you can't even talk about the facts and the truth about what happened. Like that to me, like there's an injustice there that doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem fair. It seems 100% there to protect the perpetrator and not the victim. And like, I just, it almost feels like we're living in a bizarro world. It doesn't make sense. Like it just, yeah, it doesn't make sense at all to me.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of clients that come to me. Some of them are high profile and they say things like, okay, I'm just going to sign this NDA. He's going to give me $4 million and I'm just going to shut up and go off into like, it is compelling too. Like, how much does your voice cost? Because a lot of times, and we're seeing this also with like the Epstein files and like people gathering collateral and having this stuff to kind of use against you. And there's this like shakedown that maybe goes on, and people are afraid of being exposed. So that feels really relevant. But I do think that I always say don't do it because I don't know
Yeah.
if there's a price you can put on freedom, all of the freedom.
And I don't think people actually stop to consider that. That's another thing. Well, I don't blame them because they've never been in that situation before. But what was that country music star whose ex fiance or ex wife basically refused to sign the NDA, and she started basically telling her story? The perfect example of somebody. I mean, that's probably like a one of very few who has refused the money, and that's a lot of people look at it as blood money, right? It's like, you know,
And
it's
it's long, like you don't
mhm.
know why you're going to need to tell that story 10, 15, 20 years from now. Like there are things that change in your life that might, you know, make you want to tell what you've gone through. You may just have this new wisdom. So, like, if you're 25 years old and you meet a wealthy gazillionaire and he's like, listen, like, I'm going to take care of you for the rest of your life. Here's $5 million. Just sign on the dotted line. You're like, do, 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 And then, you know, 10, 15 years later, um, there's your life, you'll be a different person. Like your whole perspective. So it's really one of those things where you sign it and it will stay with you for the rest of your natural life, as we're seeing with Gretchen. It's like that is always going to be there. I'm surprised that they haven't, because she had that victory, they weren't able to somehow, pull that into it, to get her free from that. It's wild. And I'm sure that's been exhausted. I didn't ask her. Maybe next time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what always pops up for me is thinking about if you are so worried about somebody telling their story about what you did, maybe you shouldn't have done it in the first place,
Right.
right?
I know. I know. Well, that's exactly it. It's funny. I wish somebody would ask me on a date to sign an NDA, how hard I would laugh. I'd be like, "Oh my God, I was gonna ask you the same thing. Sign right here, motherfucker." You know what happens is when you're in this world, you end up becoming really savvy. So like, somebody like myself, like I try to protect myself too now. Like, which sounds so hypocritical. But yeah, you start to get what they call like narcissistic fleas and you begin to think differently, which
You know
is
what I'm
wild.
what I'm really surprised is that there isn't like a timeline around an NDA. Like, so for instance, like I've worked in the corporate world, I've been a part of mergers and acquisitions, and I can understand, like I can 100% understand NDAs during a merger and acquisition because you're in the data room and you're getting, or you're giving confidential information. There's, financial information, and those types of things cannot be leaked. Like, so that I totally understand. But you would think that in the corporate space like that, like where Gretchen was, that it would be like you have to sign an NDA up until a certain point after your employment is terminated with the company, then you're free. Like that to me seems like a little bit more of a reasonable. Maybe that's just like a meeting them halfway. I don't know. Like I don't even know if that's possible. Like if you were to bring that up in the middle of a job interview and they give you an NDA and you go, well, yeah, I'm only going to sign it if there's a 12-month post termination of
Right.
employment.
They
Are
should. You
they?
should. This is a great market for this, Dave, for you. It's
Yeah.
called, you start an organization and it's called the SDA. It's semi-disclosure agreement. So we will allow you after 6 years to discuss things like you were abused or things like you were assaulted or things like you were, but you can't tell anybody about the special sauce of McDonald's. You're allowed to
Right.
talk about, right.
Yeah, like the corporate secrets, the corporate their P&Ls, their how they make money, how they don't make money, all of those corporate secrets. It's pretty hard to argue against signing an NDA with that because I mean you have to put yourself in the
Right.
shoes of a business owner. If you had a business and you had a secret sauce and you had something that was the livelihood of your business, you would not want somebody to be able to disclose that. So,
Mhm.
hey, you know what, sign it. But when it comes to illegal activity, when it comes to sexual assault or even like illegal activities within the company, fraud, I mean, God, I could tell you some stories. I actually bumped into an executive at a Starbucks of all place of a uh very prominent blue chip company back in the late 90s and early 2000s. And we got to talking because we were both in the same industry and he had left. He was on the executive team and he had left. And some of the things that he told me that were going on inside that boardroom before their stock collapse was just absolutely mind boggling. And like to think that an NDA would cover somebody being able to whistleblow or be able to talk about their experience about witnessing illegal activities. Now, I know it's not sexual assault, but I mean, it's still illegal. And it's like, it just, to me, it feels like the wording on these NDAs and these contracts have just been kind of extended into other areas of the business where they really shouldn't be.
What do you mean?
Like, if you're, signing an NDA to keep the trade secrets, to keep the secret sauce of the company, that's I can
Right.
understand the
Okay.
wording why
Right.
it's there, but in that now it's like that blanket where it's starting to extend into, well, you can't talk about your experience, you can't talk about anything that happened, you can't talk about
Right. Right.
anything
Right.
good,
Right. Right.
anything bad that happened at the company. It's like that's
Right.
yeah, you're just silencing
She
your
must
voice.
have, Gretchen must have felt some amount of validation when the movies at least came out. She must have been like, oh, somebody's telling the story. I don't have to tell it, but at least it's out there. She must have felt so validated around at least that experience. I did not get to ask her. Maybe next time. But I think that probably must have been like a warm hug for her because, she's sitting there um, dealing with this probably in a vacuum for so long. And then I think when she did have that victory in court, that all played out all over the press. So that must have been very validating for her as well.
That's interesting though, like how if she's not allowed to talk about her experience, how was her story told? Like in how much cinematic liberties did they take in order to ex- kind of convey what happened
Mhm.
without exposing or breaching the NDA. Do you understand what I'm saying,
Yeah,
right?
they
Like,
probably were interviewing her and they were like, just blink if this happened. And she's
yeah,
like,
no, I know.
trying to, like, she's trying to
I
walk
don't know
the
how that works.
line.
Yeah.
Well, you know what happens too, and this is really compelling because I learned this through my process, was that because of attorney-client privilege, I can tell my lawyer anything, and he's not, supposed to say anything about what we talk about, but he can talk as much as he wants about whatever he wants. You know what I mean? So it's interesting. She may have had conduits, people that knew her story, that were allowed to talk about parts of that story.
tell your story through proxy, basically.
Yes, that's
Yeah,
exactly
that's
right.
interesting. That's
That's
interesting.
probably
That's
exactly what happened. She
yeah.
probably had an army of attorneys, and those attorneys are not disallowed. They can talk
Hmm.
about it. I mean, as long as they're permitted to do so because she says so.
You
And
know what's
that's
really
another thing, like, it always comes out. That's what I'm saying. Like, at the end of the day, don't be a dick, and then you don't have to worry about anything because it's gonna find its way out. It is.
totally. I've always said like there is nothing in my past that I've ever done or ever said where I'd be, yeah, I might be a little embarrassed and maybe I shouldn't have done and said certain things, but there's never
Same.
something that I've done or said in my past where I would be like wanting to litigate in order to silence somebody from something that I have ever done and said. Like, yeah, it's of course. I mean, we all have a past. We've all made mistakes and done and said stupid things that we wish we could take back. But I mean, that's called being human, right? But I find that like, and this is where we can tie it all back into the narcissistic abuse side of things, right? It's like they know what they're doing is wrong. They're very consciously aware that they shouldn't be doing what they're doing, but their mission is to control and silence. And that's actually something that I wanted to talk to you because I've noticed this very common theme in the narcissistic abuse community that when people exit a relationship, primarily a romantic relationship, there's still this weird, well, while they're in the relationship, primarily, they have this weird, it's almost like a Jedi mind fuck where they're almost conditioned to keep quiet and not say a thing. And I don't understand where that comes from, why that happens, because we should be able to, to talk about our experience with our close friends or with whoever. And so like maybe from a therapist perspective, like where does that stem from? Is that just like the coercive control part of the whole narcissistic relationship, or is this more of a like a codependency thing? Like where what's your view on that?
I think it's fear. I think there's conditioning that comes in that sort of teaches you to not challenge your abuser. You also tend to your point, like hold them in very high regard. They build it that way so that you are um either enamored with them or they have you convinced that they have sometimes even like superpowers. And I know that sounds crazy, but I remember thinking there were a lot of coincidences that were going on around me. And that's because he built it that way. He was very like shapeshifty and chameleon, and he would stalk and mirror. So there were things that were going on that I was like, how did he know that?
Hmm.
He's probably, in my Apple ID or whatever the hell it was. But I remember thinking sometimes, like, is there some otherworldly thing going on? I know that sounds insane. And we saw that with Sarma quite a bit when he had convinced her, Sarma from Bad Vegan, and Anthony had convinced her that he was going to have some success in keeping her dog to like live longer and stuff like that. And I think what happens is when they pepper throughout the relationship these sort of like magical moments or something that you begin to sort of wonder about, like, is there some kind of like otherworldly thing happening here that, they know more than I do, or they are in tune with something that I'm not. I remember thinking at one point that there was this heavy coincidence between my ex and his attorney, who I used to be friends with. Um, and it was like weird. I remember thinking like, how does he know this stuff? How does he know this stuff about me? Maybe they're communicating and there's something going on there. It feels like there's a superpower or something weird that they're doing, and you just subscribe to it. You're just like, I'm just going to yield. I'm going to just allow them because they position themselves to be like all knowing and powerful and all of this stuff. And you sort of yield. But I think that is a great question. I think it's about not wanting to challenge them. You're afraid of the punishment, the silent treatment, whatever is going to happen. But also, they build it so that they are the repairer. They know how to fix things. They know how to make it okay. In fact, they'll, make problems just to fix them. So you'll bear witness to that, further convincing you that they, know what they're doing and all of this. So it's a great question.
Oh, you mean like starting a war and then claiming that they resolved the war kind of type
That's
thing?
exactly right.
Yeah. No, I know.
That
I
is
mean, we can,
exactly right.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
get
that's
ready for that. That's coming
yeah.
next.
Well, that'll be next, yeah. But when it comes to the corporate side of things too, I've I look at this world now, and especially seeing like the toxic traits within leadership and whatnot. And I tend, and maybe this is something that I need to change, but I tend to lean towards not speaking up and not calling out the dysfunction as well, because it's career suicide. I mean, they call it a CLM, right? A career limiting move. And it's difficult because it's, you on one hand you want it, you're feeling the injustice of it all, but then on the other side you also have bills to pay and you have a life to live as well, right? And so I find there's a lot of silencing around these toxic relationships, whether it be in romantic relationships, whether it be in families. Like families, it's the same thing. Like how many families are in the middle of a toxic family world and everyone stays silent? And it's just,
Yeah,
I
you're
don't know.
right.
Yeah.
And we see this super, super much as you're referencing in the political climate. Like I know so many people that are realtors that feel the way I feel. Or they're like, "Go, Vanessa, run your mouth," because I can't. And I honor that. What are you going to do? I
Mhm.
have to do that because I'm a social worker and I took an oath to advocate for the disenfranchised. Anybody who knows me knows that I went to USC and studied social policy. I was never supposed to be a therapist, which I love, but I'm proud to sound off. I was built for this. Like I laugh when people come at me. I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna toy with you. Get out of here. But to your point, the vast majority of people are not going to be doing that because it's too risky.
Yeah, like Dr. Romney talks about it. I remember seeing some clips of her online where she's like, never call out a narcissist and don't do it. Like they will hit you back with 10 times the vitriol, right? And that's, I mean, that happens in the corporate space as well, right? And I've seen it also in the toxic family dynamic in a lot of the clients who I speak with. The minute that somebody speaks up, it's like the smear campaign starts and then everything gets turned right back onto that person. Meanwhile, they're completely avoiding the facts of what's been going on within that toxic family system. It's like, let's just ignore what's going on and let's focus on this behavior that they're calling out or exposing us. Like it just, to me, it's just, it's maddening, right? And that's probably why Dr. Romney talks about like just it's not worth it, right? Because you'll end up going crazy. I don't
The
know.
problem is though, right, is systemically nothing changes if we don't expose shit like this. So like it's this sort of dance. Like I think you have to like try to figure out what the trade-off is in your own personal life.
Mhm.
But if we don't expose it or talk about it at all, it just probably would swallow us up.
Well, and this is why I think we do what we do, right? Is trying to educate people on all this. We may not be able to we may not be able to get people to stand up and speak up, but we can at least educate them so they know what's going on, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's like, there's that saying, right? There's what's the saying though? It's like nobody's or a narcissist's worst nightmare is an educated empath,
Mm.
right? And it's true because
Yeah,
once you
and I
see them
think
for what they are, the game changes, right?
yeah, and I think you make a good point though, is if you get clever and if you get savvy and you understand optics and you have opportunities, you can get into the by proxy of it all. There are
Hmm.
ways for you to out people. There are ways for you to do it and protect yourself. I know that people are afraid to do that and you have to be super careful. But my father used to say my father died when I was only 18, so 1,000 years ago. But he used to say things to me like, just don't get caught. And, you know, this was a zillion years ago, but,
Right. What's that saying?
he
Nothing's illegal unless you get caught.
yeah, he was funny like that. He'd be like, "Just don't drink my beer," this kind of stuff. Um, God, there's some funny things, a lot of isms that he did, but super funny guy. My son's father's like that. They were both phone guys, really hilarious, funny people. And I know that's where my brothers and I get it from, that kind of humor. But yeah, he used to say things like that all the time. Like, it didn't happen if you don't get caught, this kind of stuff. I mean, it's hilarious. But, if you can be clever enough to cover your ass and save someone else, like the new supply in the meantime, and nobody knows it's you, this kind of stuff. I mean, you didn't hear it here. But you have to speak out to some extent. So maybe by proxy, maybe you get creative, just be really careful.
Yeah, I struggle with the whole warning the new supply thing. That's an interesting topic. We should get into that because like I from my perspective, my personal opinion is that unless that person's life is in danger, it's not our job to be able to save those people.
Right, but
Because
it's not your job to shovel the sidewalk, but if there's a kid standing there and a car's coming by, you know what I mean? It's not quote
no,
unquote
that's what I
your
mean. You know,
job.
that's
Yeah.
that's what I mean. Like if the person's life is in danger, that's a different story, I think. But I
See, for
struggle.
me, they're always in danger because it's such a loss of life. You know what I mean? Like it's not like it has to be a physical loss of life for it to be a loss of life.
Yeah, I mean, I don't my mind's not 100% made up on that, but I'm leaning more towards that because and the only reason why I say that is because when you're in one of these romantic relationships, typically at the beginning, you're going through that love bombing. It's like, you got the love drugs going on, the oxytocin, the dopamine, the serotonin, and everything. Like this partner is perfect because typically narcissistic people will mirror you and they portray themselves as being the absolute perfect partner. And if somebody would, if I was in a relationship like that and somebody would have come to me and said, "Hey, you got to be like, I'm warning you, this person's not who they say they are," I would be like, what are you talking about? Like, get out of here. You know what I mean? And so that's where it's really, I
I don't
struggle
know if
with that one.
everyone
I
does
struggle with
that.
that one. Yeah.
Yeah, I know that it may feel like you wouldn't, but it would still be in your database. It would be there and you would wonder about it. It's like a seed. It just sits there and then every now and again it's like, hmm. So I don't think that it's wise to just not do anything. But to your point, don't have any expectations around what it's going to mean.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know what the answer to that is. I do know though that if when things do blow up in the future, like I would be there 100%. Like I would be there to like put the pieces back together and explain, kind of walk them through the process that trying to put the piece or answer questions that they probably have and then also put the pieces back together because that's I think what a lot of people struggle after going through a relationship with somebody with a pathological personality like that is they're left there holding the bag going what the fuck just happened, and that is very dysregulating. But
The other
yeah.
half is sometimes the new partner is a narcissist themselves. So they end up like having some kind of a toxic relationship that maybe works for them. You know what I mean? Like you don't know. Like I have a client, her abusive ex is as psychopathic as they come. And he's now married, I think, 11 years, and she's a horror, the new wife.
Mm.
And all they do is fight. All they do is re-victimize my client and bring her to court. And I'm talking about over 2,000 motions. I've told you about this client, 11
Yeah.
years. I think it's 18 years now, 11 years in court, 18 years of trauma, though, because he took her to China to get this divorce. Anyway, I'm convinced he took her to China because he wanted to kill her, actually. And it didn't work. And that's why he's so mad, is that she's still around and he has to pay her money every month. And so he's pretty upset about that. But the wife is like terrible. And um, it's wild because they do fight. They are constantly at odds, but like somehow this cycle, they're because they don't have empathy, I'm imagining either of them, they are not as affected as, let's say, you or I would become in that circle. So the cycle of abuse goes around and like, pass assault. And like, I'm like, oh, like I could, I remember my girlfriend said to me at one point, and I've told you this before too, you should just stay for the money. And I was like, I would. I cannot tolerate this. It is so intolerable. But I think there's like this threshold that people might have. Maybe if there's two narcissists, maybe that bandwidth is such that they're like, okay,
It's like a circle jerk of supply.
yeah.
Like it just
Well,
constantly
I didn't
goes in circles.
get supply. I guess you do get supply from the engagement. So they are getting get supply.
Yeah. Like that volatile need for tension and oh yeah, just whereas I think a neurotypical person would be like, I can't, like my nervous system just can't handle this. Yeah.
No way.
No, I
I
know.
was just like, I just was like, you are fucked up. I gotta get out of here. But I think there are different people, like with this client, they are together for a good amount. And I know they argue because there are financial issues now. As always with narcissists, they overspend and, there's a hole in the bucket. And I mean, multi million. I think the divorce itself costs them each, I think it cost him 5 million and it cost her 2. So there's $7 million like that you could literally take and burn. I mean, I suppose their attorneys would argue against that and say, listen, I bought my boat, I bought my 16 Ferraris because of this case and this case alone. I mean, I've
Yeah.
seen the bills.
Yeah.
I saw one bill recently for $400,000, $80,000 just for 1 month.
Well, I have a friend of mine who she went through a horrible divorce, and it took, I want to say it was 6 years. And literally on the 11th hour, the day before they were to appear in court, he agreed to sign off on everything that he would have got from day one. But he ended up actually getting less because they had burnt through attorney's fees throughout those 6 years. It's just it doesn't make sense at all,
Yeah.
because then it just, because there's no logic involved at that point. This, because it's
No.
all about emotion, it's all about winning, and they want to crush people at all costs, and it doesn't matter. They will put you through the ringer at all costs just to say that they won.
Yeah.
And
And they
it's
will even like spite themselves, like sort of the low end of this, the narcissist who's socioeconomically challenged will not work and become homeless so that they don't have to pay child support, lose their teeth, ride a bike to work, like just cut their arms off with a rusty spoon before they write a check because they just, to your point, are so opposed to the concept of having no control and to having you win.
Where does that come from? Like, from a psychology perspective, as a therapist, hearing a story like that, is that just pure ego? Is that a part of their malignancy? Like, what? Like, where does that? What part of the brain does that develop where they think
I
that this
feel
is a
like
great idea?
I feel like it is part ego with the narcissist, but with the sociopath, it feels like it's the non-conforming. Like if you're gonna tell me to do this, I'm doing the opposite, no matter what. Like there's this oppositional,
Mm.
like perpetual contrarian that shows up and it's like to their own demise. I mean, they were literally like anti-establishment, non-conforming, like hell no. Like that's what scares me about Trump is like I will burn it all to the ground before I leave this White House. I will literally set the world ablaze. I will push the red button. Ha 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 ha. So like this oppositional thing is extreme. It's not a joke. I mean, you and I have talked about, my ex and the way he would go to the bathroom and like the way that it was very bizarre, because it was oppositional. I mean, it's so extreme, the contrarian perspective in an antisocial that they will literally go as far as you could imagine to protect that narrative, to protect their egos. Um, it's wild. It's like
Well,
it really is interesting.
it starts dipping into delusions. That's the thing that I think is scary for a lot of people, right? Because it's like you go through this and you're speaking with them, and you're like, like, what part of your brain actually thinks that this is a good idea? Like, this, it makes no sense. It's like they're living in a fantasy world that is completely disconnected from reality. And that in itself is so dysregulating, because like you almost are gaslighting yourself, thinking that like you're in a bizarro world, and like I don't even know how anyone's brain can work like this. Like, it just, I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
I don't profess to understand it completely, but I definitely can spot it, and it still, to this day, after years of being in this space, it does not make sense at all.
Yeah, it is. There is a level of delusion, and it is really fascinating to imagine, it's kind of how their brain is working, what they're picturing, what they're imagining. But yeah, a lot of even things that would be self-harming, they'll get involved in pretty readily as long as they, can win one up.
Mm.
Um, Very, very severe. And this is obviously with the more antisocial where you're seeing that like highly oppositional. Yeah, very, very tricky stuff. But what do you think about what's going on in the news? Where are we today?
Stayed off the news today
Okay, good for
because
you.
it's a little too much.
Yeah.
I have to take it in small doses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Every day there's something else.
Well, I
Um,
think the thing that just completely blew my mind was Marco Rubio going to the press yesterday and saying one thing and then coming back today and saying that he never said it. And it's just like it's fucking on tape. Like what like how like like we're seeing gaslighting at a grand scale and it's to me it's just this is one of the biggest challenges about being in this space is that how we say once you learn the playbook, once you see it you can no longer unsee it.
yeah.
And now it's like you see it just constantly, right? And the sad thing is that there's a certain percentage in a certain segment of the population that's going to see that and say, yeah, absolutely, he never said that. It's, what, I'm sorry, what?
Right.
But
Well,
like,
that goes back to Kellyanne Conway, and she's like fake news, alternate facts, I mean, all of this shit. But
yeah,
I think let's leave on a positive today because we're just about finished. I think the positive, and tell me if you think this is crazy. I was just thinking about this when you were saying that, is that when you and I first met and we started chatting about this all of those years ago, I don't know that I had as much of an understanding of the corruption that was the Epstein files and like how it was like worldwide or global. Or I think that even though it's painful to have the veil pulled back on my ex or my client's exes or anyone in your life, there's this tremendous silver lining around Trump. And you and I have talked about that of like, now I can see the people around me. And even if I have compassion for them having syndrome or being in a cult with MAGA and Trump, I know what it looks like. I have an understanding. And I feel like that knowledge is extremely powerful. And it seems to just elevate. So, as much as it's hard to know the things, and sometimes I know ignorance is bliss, I know, I do think that there has to be a lot of value. Do you feel that there's, a lot of silver linings around having these understandings?
I do. And I've had a few people ask me about my own personal story and dealing with narcissistic individuals. And my response has been pretty consistent is that after going through my own personal experiences, whether it be in personal relationships or in the corporate world or with the family or anything like that, obtaining this knowledge, there's a certain level of gratitude that comes along with it. And it's hard to explain to somebody that you can take something that's been really, really painful and really difficult in your life and then come out on the other side and have a very high degree of gratitude. So you're right. There is a silver lining because I think what it does is it's bittersweet, right? It opens your mind and it allows you to see things for how they really are, not how you hope they are. And then what happens is that it changes, I think, the path of your life to make sure that you're surrounding yourself with people who are like-minded, who are growth mindset and like are good individuals and kind of I don't want to say cut ties, but yeah, for all intents and purposes, you kind of, distance yourself from people with these certain pathological personalities.
Yeah, it feels like there's been a light that's been shining now on some of these toxic behaviors and certainly people that are, involved in it. And I think that I have to imagine that that's a blessing. Otherwise, I'll go crazy,
Yeah,
which I already
exactly.
am.
No, you're not.
All right, Dave. So thank you for the chat. I think it was really, an amazing. I'm always so like glad to speak with Gretchen, which I've done a million times. She totally changed my life because she highlighted my run across New York. So I will always be so grateful. And the work she's doing is so important. And so I'm glad that we got to talk about that today. And till next time, thank you so much. It's always the best to shoot the shit with you. Thank you for joining us today on Narcissistic Abuse with Vanessa Reiser. If this episode resonated with you, or if you recognize any of these patterns in your own life or someone you care about, know that you are not alone and healing is possible. If you found value in this conversation, please take a moment to like, subscribe, share, and leave a review. It helps us reach more survivors who need to hear these messages. For exclusive bonus content, deeper discussions with Dave and me, and ways to support the show, join us on Patreon or follow along on Instagram or YouTube at Vanessa Reiser LCSW. Until next time, keep choosing yourself, setting boundaries, and walking toward the light. And remember, healing is a radical rebellion, and your peace is the revolution. Take care, and I'll see you in the next episode.